Thank you all very much. Over the last several years, we've seen crystal clear examples of what works and what doesn't work in America's energy sector. On the one hand, the private sector has offered inspiring examples of creativity with hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, expanding energy supplies, putting downward pressure on prices, and creating jobs and growth. On the other hand, unnecessary federal regulations have artificially driven up the cost of energy, slowed development on federal lands, and impacted the private sector's ability to innovate and meet new challenges to provide Americans with affordable energy. Now, at the start of today's event, I mentioned that the only way to win conservative policy victories would be to win elections by inspiring millions of Americans with bold policy ideas aimed at changing the broken status quo in Washington. Washington, D.C. is not broken. It is a finely tuned machine aimed at expanding federal power and using it to reward those who are politically well-connected. The only way to change that status quo is to inspire Americans across the country to get involved and demand control of their government. Nobody has done more sooner to advance this agenda than our next speaker. 3 words summarize his first year in office: make D.C. listen. And whether it's been fighting a bipartisan gun control agenda, the imperial presidency of Barack Obama, or doing everything possible to stop Obamacare before it disrupted our nation's healthcare system, Ted Cruz has been the leading conservative reform movement for the last year. Ladies and gentlemen, here to talk about the America Energy Renaissance Act, please join me in welcoming a great American senator, Ted Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good afternoon. It's great to join you. I just got off a plane coming in from Texas. Exactly. I got to tell you, yesterday it was 70 degrees back in Houston. I took my girls out to the park. I get out here, and it is freezing. I mean, it is really cold. I have to admit, I was surprised. Al Gore told us this wouldn't happen. Look, it is so cold, I actually saw a Democrat with his hands in his own pockets. Now that's cold. Mike mentioned the disconnect there is in Washington. The disconnect between career politicians in both parties and the American people. The most common frustration you hear all across the state of Texas and all across the country is that politicians in Washington, they aren't listening to us. And this cuts across party lines. This is true of Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians. Americans are frustrated because their priorities are not the priorities of Washington. If you get outside the Beltway, the number one priority of Americans is jobs and economic growth. State of Texas, doesn't matter where in the state you are. You can be in East Texas, West Texas. You can be up in the Panhandle or down in the Rio Grande Valley. Over and over again, when you ask Texans, when you ask Americans, what's your top priority, the answer over and over again is restoring jobs, restoring economic growth. And yet I've got to tell you, in the 13 months that I've served in the Senate, we have spent virtually zero time even talking about growth. In Harry Reid's Senate, jobs and economic growth don't even make it onto the agenda. We spent 6 weeks talking about guns and the president's agenda to restrict the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, and virtually no time talking about fundamental tax reform, about regulatory reform, about reducing the barriers coming from Washington that are making it harder and harder for people who are struggling to achieve the American dream. Today, what I want to talk to you about is one specific avenue we can pursue to restore growth. It is truly, I believe, a providential blessing that at a time where we've had 5 years of stagnant growth, at a time when we've got the lowest labor force participation in this country since 1978, we are also seeing the beginning of a revolution in energy. We are seeing extraordinary developments in energy that are opening up resources that 5 or 10 years ago would have been unimaginable. That, as I said, is a providential blessing. We are seeing the beginning of an American energy renaissance. And if the federal government doesn't get in the way and mess it up, that has the potential to transform the situation for so many people who are struggling. Take a look at a state like North Dakota. The president has told us he wants to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Now, what he doesn't confront is that the real Obama minimum wage is $0. Because that's what everyone who has lost their jobs under the crushing taxes and crushing regulations is getting right now, is $0 with the Obama minimum wage. If you look at North Dakota, the average hourly wage in the oil and gas industry in North Dakota is $45.90 an hour. I'm a lot more interested in generating lots of jobs at those wage levels where people can provide for their family than in continuing the path where more and more people who are struggling lose their jobs. In North Dakota, which is experiencing a boom because of shale gas and oil, the unemployment rate is 2.6%. In North Dakota, does anyone know the hourly pay for a cashier at Walmart? $17.50. In North Dakota, McDonald's is offering a $300 signing bonus because people can make so much money in the oil fields that it's hard to get people to flip burgers. That's the potential of growth. And I got to tell you, it's happening in my home state of Texas as well. The Dallas Morning News reported last year that, quote, in West Texas, the flood of money and workers into the region is impossible to miss. Increased oil revenue is turning around poorer school districts. A high school graduate can earn more than $80,000 driving trucks. From 2001 to 2012, the number of Texas upper middle income jobs grew 24.2%. Now think about that for a second. A high school graduate making $80,000 a year driving trucks, those are the sorts of jobs that we want to see expanded, bringing back working class jobs, blue collar jobs where people can earn a living, provide for their family. That was the backbone of the American middle class. Those are the jobs that have been decimated under the Obama economy. And you know, we're seeing that as well in Pennsylvania and parts of Ohio as they're taking advantage of the Marcellus Shale. And you know, even so, it is striking. If you look at the Marcellus Shale, the shale doesn't end at the border between Pennsylvania and New York, but the jobs do. The jobs end because in New York, they don't allow fracking. And so New Yorkers apparently, according to their political leadership, don't want jobs because they prohibited the ability to develop. And so if you go south to Pennsylvania, you're seeing this kind of economic opportunity, and the arbitrary line carved in the ground shows the impact of misguided government policies. Now, there is one thing and only one thing that can stop us from achieving the full potential of this energy renaissance, and that is the government. Let me tell you a story. It's a story about a modern pioneer. Some might call him a modern-day Hank Rearden. It's a fellow named George Mitchell. Now, if you listen to the President's State of the Union address a couple of years ago, you might think President Obama invented fracking. But let me suggest that the credit for the technological developments far more properly belongs with George Mitchell. Here's what The Economist magazine described George Mitchell as. Mitchell was the embodiment of the American dream. His father was a poor Greek immigrant, a goat herd who later ran a shoe shine shop in Galveston, Texas. Mr. Mitchell had to work his way through university and graduated at the top of his class. He was also the embodiment of the entrepreneurial spirit. He did not discover shale oil and gas. Geological surveys had revealed them decades before he started. He did not even invent fracking. It had been in use since the 1940s. But few great entrepreneurs invent something entirely new. His greatness lay in a combination of vision and grit. He was convinced that technology could unlock the vast reserves of energy in the Barnett Shale beneath Dallas and Fort Worth. And he kept grappling with the unforgiving rock until it eventually surrendered its riches. Now, the point I want to make, economic growth, the energy revolution, didn't come from the U.S. Department of Energy. It didn't come from any government agency. It didn't come from a grant program picking, this is how we're going to transform energy. It didn't even come, with all due respect to our wonderful hosts, from a think tank in Washington. It came from entrepreneurs putting capital at risk and meeting a need. And let me note that where it occurred was not accidental. It occurred in my home state of Texas. There are very few states in the Union that would have allowed the experimentation, would have allowed Mitchell to go. The Barnett Shale is not some distant formation out in the countryside. It is right underneath Dallas and Fort Worth, major cities. You know, California is blessed to have significant shale formations. They're not developing them. Had Mitchell been in California, had California's regulatory system been the only regulatory system we have, there's no way Mitchell would have succeeded. Because there's no way he would have been allowed to try and develop the technology. Think for a moment what we are able to do now to drill down miles into the ground, turn and drill miles horizontally, and extract resources. You want to talk about technology. You want to talk about unbelievably difficult engineering feats. Can you imagine trying to do the same thing under San Francisco? Couldn't have happened. That is the story of America. This government is fond of picking winners and losers. Or to be more fair, is fond of picking losers. It seems this administration would like to see a whole lot more Solyndras and a whole lot fewer George Mitchells. What an incredible opportunity we have right now. But we can't fall victim to what Hayek called the fatal conceit. We cannot believe that government invents, creates, or produces. It doesn't. What it often does is it stifles invention, stifles creativity, stifles production. The only thing that can stop this great energy renaissance is the government getting in the way. And I will note, particularly with this administration, it's been doing that more and more. Right now, federal land contains 43% of the nation's oil reserves and 28% of the nation's natural gas reserves. But significant portions of that land are not available for development. The number of new leases has fallen by 42%, from 9,661 to 5,568 between the Bush and Obama administrations. Now, you may be confused because if you saw the President's State of the Union address, He proudly took credit for expanding oil and gas production. What he didn't mention is that it's expanding on private lands, not on government lands, on private lands. The U.S. has approved 37% fewer new drilling permits under the Obama administration than under the Bush administration. Now, presidents going back to Richard Nixon have given speeches calling for energy independence. It doesn't take a geopolitical expert. It doesn't take the renowned insight of a Henry Kissinger to realize that our nation being dependent on foreign nations for energy, many of whose interests are very different than our own, is profoundly dangerous. And as a result of the innovation, as a result of the technological advances we have right now, we're seeing jobs, we are seeing incomes rising, we are seeing less and less dependence on foreign oil, we are seeing the environment improve in unprecedented levels based on the expansion of natural gas that is reducing emissions. You know, it's interesting, our office put together a map of counties across America, color-coded as to whether median income has gone up or gone down. That map looks like it could be a geological map of shale formations in this country. Because you can see median income going up in and around the Bakken, down around the Barnett, the Marcellus, at the Eagle Ford Shale, and one other notable exception, Washington, D.C. The rest of the country, sadly, has seen median incomes go down. We should be lessening the barriers for incomes to go up everywhere, for every American. You know, just recently, President Obama's former Secretary of Energy, and I would note that under prior administrations, it was the U.S. Secretary of Energy, but our president is fond of saying it is my Secretary of Energy. So his Secretary of Energy recently observed that the delay with the Keystone Pipeline is not scientific, it's political. There have been 5 environmental reviews, each of which has concluded the Keystone Pipeline does not raise significant environmental concerns, and yet it has not gone forward because this administration continues to block it. Tens of thousands of high-paying jobs, literally with a stroke of a pen, the private sector could be allowed to create. But this administration is not stroking that pen. But here's the point. As much as we need to approve the Keystone Pipeline, we need to think far broader than that. We need to do far more. In coming weeks, I will be introducing a bill, the American Energy Renaissance Act, that is designed to do 2 significant things. Number one, to prevent the federal government from stopping the energy renaissance that is blossoming across the country. And number 2, to expand the lands, the resources that are available for the private sector to develop so that we can answer what the American people are asking for, which is jobs and economic growth. This opportunity is right in front of us if the federal government will simply listen to the American people. Now, what are the elements of this bill? I'll give you the elements at broad level, and I'll tell you in coming weeks we are continuing to receive input from multiple players as we design the exact pieces, but here are the broad strokes. Number 1, preventing federal regulation of hydraulic fracturing. Fracking, a technology that has been in use for over 60 years, is what, in combination with horizontal drilling, has opened up resources that were unimaginable. There is no reason for the federal government to get in the way of fracking. And if the federal government did so, the harm to the economy, the harm to the number of people who could otherwise have good jobs would be staggering. The states care every bit as much about having clean water and clean air. But we are seeing states that are able to ensure clean water and clean air with responsible fracking and at the same time not impede the development of our resources. Number two, improve domestic refining capacity. Streamline the process for upgrading and building new refineries. You know, we haven't built a new large refinery in the United States since 1977. That's got to change. Number three, allow and approve the Keystone Pipeline. And remove the barriers for approving additional pipelines. There is no reason for this bureaucratic mess in Washington. No reason whatsoever. And I would note, a pipeline, building the Keystone Pipeline ought to be a no-brainer. In the Senate, there is a large bipartisan majority, Republicans and Democrats who agree we should build this pipeline. It's a no-brainer from the perspective of jobs. It's a no-brainer from the perspective of national security. It's a no-brainer from the perspective of tax revenues. And it is even a no-brainer from the perspective of the environment. Indeed, I will suggest, if you are a Birkenstock-wearing, tree-hugging, Greenpeace activist, you should love the Keystone Pipeline. You should love the Keystone Pipeline because, number one, the Keystone Pipeline is not built. It means we will continue to rely more and more on overseas oil, and as long as there are oil on tankers, there will be spills. By any measure, transporting oil on a pipeline is far safer for the environment, far more controllable than overseas tankers. And number two, if the pipeline is not built north-south, it will be built. It'll just go east-west instead. The Canadians are not going to leave the tar sands unmolested. And if it goes east-west, they'll send it to China to be refined there. And it will be refined in a much, much dirtier way. So if your concern is the environment, the last thing you want to do is send that oil to China to be refined there, which will do far more damage to the environment than refining it in the U.S. where it would generate good, high-paying jobs and benefit the environment. Number four, stop EPA overreach and the war on coal. You know, we are blessed to have enormous coal resources in this country. And yet, the last 5 years, we have seen an all-out war on coal. When I visit with those working in the oil and gas industry, I tell them quite frequently, you guys are the second most despised industry in the country in this administration. Only coal exceeds it. In 2008, President Obama was quite candid. He said you can open a new coal plant and it'll bankrupt you. And we have seen hundreds of coal units across this country shut down. You know, I have to tell you, some time ago I was in southern Illinois visiting coal workers, visiting people working in coal, and one after the other came up and shook my hand. And the look on their faces as they realized their government has declared a war on their lifestyle. The look of just hopelessness and despair. Generations of families who provided for their families, for their kids, working in coal up and down the Appalachia. Now, these are not the favored classes this administration likes. These are not titans of Wall Street. These are not CEOs flying on corporate jets. They do very well under the Obama administration. The top 1% of our economy, the millionaires and billionaires the president loves to demagogue, right now earn a higher share of our national income than any time since 1928. The people who have been hurt by the Obama economy are the people who are struggling. They're young people, they're Hispanics, they're African Americans, they're single moms. They're people working in coal country who for generations have been able to provide for their families, and they're seeing their jobs go away as the administration tries to shut it down. That doesn't make any sense. Number 5, we need to force Congress and the president to vote on EPA regulations that kill jobs. The EPA is issuing a new regulation that's going to take away jobs. Let members of Congress sign off on it. Let members of Congress go home to their districts and say, I voted to eliminate your job. Part of the reason we see this out-of-control regulatory state is that Congress has outsourced its responsibilities, has handed it to unaccountable regulators who don't actually have to see the American people. Our constitutional system is based on accountability. If Congress has to cast a vote before putting in place regulations that kill jobs, I suspect we will see a little bit more focus on what the American people care about, which is economic growth and jobs. Number 6, proactively. So the first 5 that I laid out were preventing the federal government from stopping the American energy renaissance. The next are proactively expanding it. Broaden energy development on federal land. Provide states the option of leasing, permitting, or regulating energy resources on federal lands. There are states that are eager to see the kind of job production we're seeing in North Dakota, we're seeing in Texas. I suspect there are other states that would be very happy to see high-paying jobs come to their states, would be very happy to see welfare rolls dropping down because people are getting jobs and providing for their families, would be very happy to see local school districts' tax revenues going up because people are providing jobs, getting jobs, and providing for their families. And yet the federal government is not opening up those lands for development. The states can do a far better job of that. Among other things, we should expand energy development on Indian lands. There are considerable natural resources on Indian lands. Many Native Americans, tragically, live in crushing poverty. And the resources are right there to improve their standard of living. And it is only the federal government that is keeping them in that condition of poverty. We ought to allow Native American tribes to develop the resources on their own lands. Number 7, we need to open up offshore exploration. Expand the offshore areas of the outer continental shelf that are available for development. And streamlining the permitting. We have enormous resources that we're simply not accessing. And we're actually sitting by and letting other nations develop those resources instead. Doesn't make any sense. Number 8, we need to expand U.S. energy exports. We need to expand liquid natural gas exports. We're producing natural gas at incredible levels, and yet the bureaucratic paperwork to export LNG has been mind-numbingly slow. We ought to open it up, which also gives incentives for developing more resources here, but also gives the ability to expand trade and commerce across the globe. We need to end the crude oil export ban. Right now, exporting crude oil is prohibited, and that is a relic from ages where our supply of crude oil was viewed as quite limited. We are now developing crude at an extraordinary level, and unfortunately, there's a mismatch because most of our refineries in the U.S. are designed to refine heavy crude from nations like Saudi Arabia. And so the sweet light crude being developed here, our own refineries have limited capacity to refine. And we also should reduce the regulatory barriers to exporting coal. With all of those, with producing our natural resources, if we expand the markets they can go, that generates more and more high-paying jobs. And let me note something. The jobs that we're seeing in this energy renaissance are not just oil and gas jobs. They wouldn't just be coal jobs if we ended the war on coal from this administration. They are jobs across a host of industries, like heavy manufacturing, where we're seeing more and more heavy manufacturing come back to the United States. Industries like the steel industry that have been beleaguered. For generations, we had hardworking Americans, union members, going to work in heavy manufacturing, providing for their kids, and we've seen their jobs drying up as the working class in this country has been left out of federal government priorities. We're seeing those heavy manufacturing jobs come back, and we're able to compete with nations like China, not based on low-cost labor. None of us want to compete with China based on low-cost labor, but competing instead based on low-cost energy, based on the abundant natural resources that God has given this country that are here and available if the federal government simply will allow private initiative to develop those resources. And finally, I would note, preventing Washington from stopping the American energy renaissance has enormous benefits, will produce millions of high-paying jobs across this country, and also will generate significant additional revenues to Washington. And the final element in this bill is that the additional revenues coming in will be dedicated in a trust fund to paying down our crushing national debt. 5 years ago, our national debt was $10 trillion. Today, it is over $17 trillion. It has grown some 60% in just 5 years. It took 43 presidents over 200 years to build $10 trillion in debt. One president in 5 years to grow it over 60%. What we're doing to our kids and grandkids is wrong, and by having a trust fund dedicated that these additional revenues will go directly to paying down debt, we can start exercising some basic responsibility. You know, our parents didn't do that to us. They didn't give us a crushing debt we couldn't escape from. How can we possibly be content to do it to our kids and to their kids? Now, I will note, money in Washington, trust funds in Washington, have a way of being fungible. But the advantage of dedicating this revenue is it increases the political price of politicians raiding the kitty. Doesn't mean they won't have the instinct to raid the kitty. But it does mean that any politician who tries will face accountability going home of his or her constituents saying, why are you spending money in the trust fund to free us from our debt on your own spending project instead? This is a combination that makes enormous sense for our country. And I want to close with this. I've said many times that where we are today is eerily similar to the late 1970s. We are seeing the same failed economic policies from Washington we saw under the Jimmy Carter administration, out-of-control spending and taxes and regulation. And we're seeing the exact same economic stagnation and malaise as a result. Just this afternoon, I reread President Carter's speech on energy. Because I am a glutton for punishment. It really was striking. He compared the energy crisis of the 70s to, quote, the moral equivalent of war. And he told the country, we are running out of oil and gas. By the mid-1980s, it'll be gone. It's really worth rereading. It is a speech where he tells the American people, I am calling on all of you to sacrifice. And listen, anytime a politician calls on you to sacrifice, grab your wallet. For some reason, the sacrifice never seems to hit the rarefied air in Washington. And sacrifice just thickens the government while the rest of the American people hurt. It's worth rereading Carter's speech, because I'm pretty sure every single word in the entire speech is wrong, including and thee. But what's striking is how much of our energy policy is still stuck back in the 1970s. It's like that TV show with Ashton Kutcher, that 70s show. That is the current federal government's approach to energy. We still have antiquated bans on exporting crude, restrictions on LNG. We have antiquated rules on building pipelines that enable a president who's being irresponsible to arbitrarily stand in the way, to behave, as his energy secretary said, politically, to stop those tens of thousands of, I might note, union jobs that are not being created because the president doesn't want them created. The rules and restrictions we have are for a different time, for a different era. We can, by simply allowing entrepreneurs, allowing the private sector to do what it does best, we can continue this incredible energy renaissance. And that, I would suggest, is in everyone's interest. Thank you.